Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1. The Basement Behind the Closet. I was 22 when I rented the old house on Maple Street. The place was cheap, too cheap, considering its size, 3 bedrooms, a big kitchen, and an attic. The landlord told me it had been on the market for years, but couldn't find long-term tenants. "Folks just don't stay," he muttered, sliding the lease across the table. I thought nothing of it. A low rent was all that mattered to me back then. The house had character, the kind that felt cozy in daylight, but a little suffocating after dark. The wooden floors creaked with every step, the wallpaper peeled in long curls, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. In the back bedroom, what I planned to turn into an office, there was a closet. Just a normal, narrow closet with a single shelf and a rail for hanging clothes. I stacked some boxes in there and left it alone. For the first 2 weeks, everything was fine. Quiet nights, long mornings, no disturbances. Then the noises began. It started as a faint tapping, always late at night. I'd be at my desk typing, and I'd hear it, soft, rhythmic, coming from the closet. At first, I thought it was a mouse or maybe pipes settling, but it persisted. Sometimes the tapping grew louder, like knuckles rapping against wood. I searched inside with a flashlight, but found nothing. No droppings, no gaps in the walls, just my cardboard boxes stacked neatly. One night, frustrated, I pressed my ear against the back wall of the closet. That's when I realized the sound wasn't coming from inside the closet at all. It was coming from beyond it. I knocked back, 3 quick raps. For a moment, there was silence. Then, 3 slow raps in return. My stomach dropped. The next morning, I emptied the closet. I ran my hands over the plaster, looking for cracks. That's when I noticed it. A thin seam, vertical, almost invisible unless you were inches away. I pressed my fingers against it and felt the faintest give, like the wall wasn't solid. The idea that there might be a hidden space behind it gnawed at me. Curiosity turned into obsession. I bought a crowbar and, one evening, pried along the seam until the plaster cracked. What I revealed wasn't insulation or wooden beams, but the edge of a door there. It shouldn't have. The house's layout didn't allow for another room behind that wall. The landlord had shown me the blueprints. 2 stories, no basement. Yet here was a door. The knob was rusted, cold to the touch. My heart raced as I twisted it. To my shock, it opened easily. A set of wooden stairs descended into darkness. A smell of damp and rot wafted up, so strong it stung my eyes. I hesitated, every instinct screaming to shut the door and forget it. But the pull of the unknown was stronger. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped down. The stairs creaked under my weight, but they held. The air grew colder the deeper I went, thick and wet like a cave. When I reached the bottom, my light cut through the dark and revealed a basement that should not have existed. The walls were stone, slick with moisture, and the ceiling was low enough that I had to hunch. Old wooden furniture sat scattered about, a table, a chair, even a wardrobe. But they weren't covered in dust, as you'd expect from something long sealed away. No, they looked used. There were footprints in the dirt floor, bare footprints. I froze. My light flickered just once, and in that moment I felt I wasn't alone. The silence pressed in heavy, broken only by the drip-drip of water somewhere in the dark. On the far wall, I noticed something carved into the stone. I moved closer, sweeping the beam of light over it. Words scratched deep and frantic, "Do not open the door." The breath caught in my throat. Which door? The one I had just come through? Or another? As if in answer, I heard it, a scraping sound from the wardrobe behind me. Wood against stone, a slow drag. I spun, light shaking in my hand. The wardrobe door was ajar now. I knew I hadn't touched it. I took 1 step closer and the door swung wider with a groan. My flashlight beam pierced the shadows inside and showed nothing, just empty space. But the smell that rushed out was unbearable, sour and metallic, like blood and mold mixed together. And then, from the darkness inside the wardrobe, came the tapping, the same rhythm I'd heard in my closet upstairs. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and bolted for the stairs. As I scrambled up, the tapping grew louder, faster, like dozens of knuckles drumming at once. I slammed the hidden door shut and shoved the boxes back in place, covering it as best I could. For the rest of the night, I sat in my bed, The flashlight clutched tight, listening. Hours passed. The tapping stopped, but just as dawn broke, I heard a new sound. Soft footsteps moving slowly across the room beneath me. The basement. I didn't sleep the next night or the night after. I called the landlord, demanding answers. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "You weren't supposed to find that door." His voice trembled. "Whatever you do, don't go back down there. If you've opened it, you've let it know you're there." I moved out 2 days later, left most of my furniture behind. I couldn't stand to pack alone in that house, not with the feeling of eyes watching me from behind the closet. Even now, in another city, another apartment, I sometimes wake in the night to faint tapping on the walls. 3 knocks, paused, then 3 more. And I know, deep down, that somewhere behind plaster and wood, a hidden door is waiting. And something in the dark is still knocking back. Story 2, the motel room that wasn't on the map. It was one of those trips I hadn't planned very well. I'd been driving cross-country to start a new job on the other side of the state, trying to save money by skipping hotels whenever I could. I would sleep in my car at rest stops, or just push through the night, guzzling gas station coffee until my eyes burned. But after nearly 18 hours of driving straight, exhaustion got the better of me. My eyelids felt like they weighed 100 pounds each, and every lane marker seemed to blur into the next. I knew I had to stop. If I didn't, I'd probably drift off and crash. That's when I saw the glowing vacancy sign of a roadside motel just off the highway. It seemed almost too convenient, like it appeared right when I needed it. The sign flickered a pale blue, half of the letters burned out, but I could make out the word motel in shaky neon. The building itself was small and squat, painted a peeling beige with a line of doors facing the gravel parking lot. There weren't many cars there, maybe 1 or 2, but I didn't think much of it. It was late, and most people were either long gone or asleep. I pulled in, shut off the car, and stepped into the night air. The office door was propped open, and a tired-looking man in his 60s sat behind the counter, half watching an old box TV that hissed with static. He didn't look up until I rang the bell. "Need a room?" he asked, voice gravelly, eyes bloodshot. "Yeah, just for the night," I said. He slid a paper ledger across the counter, the kind you hardly see anymore. No computer, no card reader, just a pen and a page with names scratched in uneven handwriting. I signed my name and slid it back. He gave me a brass key with a plastic tag that read Room 6. "Down at the end," he muttered, already turning back to his TV. The lot was silent as I walked to my room. Each door had its number painted in fading white, and mine was at the very end, near a shadowed stretch where the motel's flickering lights didn't quite reach. When I slid the key into the lock, the door groaned as it opened, as if it hadn't been used in years. Inside, the room was simple but clean enough. A bed with a faded quilt, a nightstand with a dusty lamp, a small dresser, and a TV with rabbit ear antennas. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic like rust. I shrugged it off, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. I must have drifted off instantly, because the next thing I remember was waking up to a soft tapping. At first, I thought it was someone outside, maybe at the window. But when I sat up, the room was dead silent. Then the tapping came again, this time from inside the walls. A faint, hollow knock, like someone's knuckle rapping just beneath the plaster. I froze, staring at the spot where the sound came from. It was near the dresser, right above the baseboard. My pulse quickened, but exhaustion overpowered my fear. I convinced myself it was just old pipes, the kind of thing that happens in rundown motels. Pulling the covers tighter, I forced myself back to sleep. Morning light filtered weakly through the thin curtains. I rubbed my eyes, gathered my things, and headed to the office to check out. But when I walked into the front lobby, the counter was empty. No man, no TV, not even the ledger. The place looked abandoned, dust on the counter, chairs stacked against the wall, cobwebs in the corners. I called out a few times, but no one answered. Finally, I set the key on the desk and left. Back on the road, I stopped at a diner a few towns over for breakfast. Over coffee, I casually mentioned to the waitress that I'd stayed at the little roadside motel down the highway. Her smile faltered. "What motel?" "The one about 10 miles east," I said. "Neon sign just says motel, kind of rundown." She frowned, shaking her head. "There hasn't been a motel out that way in 20 years. Place burned down. Total loss. Nobody rebuilt." I laughed nervously. No, I stayed there last night, room 6. Old guy at the desk gave me the key. Her face went pale. She leaned in closer, voice hushed. Honey, that fire killed the owner. People say he still hangs around, checking people in, but the building's gone. All that's left is a burned foundation and weeds. I tried to argue, but her expression told me she wasn't joking. Against my better judgment, I drove back down the highway to see for myself. And sure enough, when I pulled off the exit, there was no motel. No sign. Just a cracked driveway leading to a blackened slab of concrete, half swallowed by tall grass. I parked and got out, walking to where I swore my room had been. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though there was no fire. The only thing left was a rusted brass key lying in the dirt. When I picked it up, I felt a chill run through me. The plastic tag still read room 6. I didn't keep it. I tossed it into the weeds and left without looking back. But every so often, late at night when I'm driving alone, I see a flickering neon glow just ahead, hovering in the distance. And every time, I keep going, no matter how tired I am, because I know if I stop, there might be another room waiting for me, one that doesn't exist. Story 3, the attic door that appeared overnight. The night it appeared, I didn't hear a sound, no hammering, no scraping, not even the creak of floorboards, just sleep, heavy and undisturbed, until morning light leaked through my curtains. I dragged myself out of bed, shuffling toward the kitchen, when something caught my eye. The ceiling in the hallway looked different. At first, I thought it was the angle of the light, a shadow making the paint look uneven. But when I craned my neck, I froze. Right above the hallway, a square outline had etched itself into the ceiling where there had been nothing the day before. Not only that, it had a pull cord dangling, faintly swaying as though someone had just let it go. An attic door. But my house didn't have an attic. When I'd bought the place, I'd been assured it was a one-story bungalow, simple and straightforward. No hidden spaces, no unfinished crawl spaces overhead. The inspector had even noted that the roof had no loft or additional structure. Yet here was a square, perfectly framed hatch, sitting there like it had always belonged. For a long time, I just stood and stared. The air in the hallway felt heavier, colder somehow. My coffee sat forgotten on the counter. I almost convinced myself not to touch it, to ignore it and go about my day. But the cord dangled there, begging to be pulled, its tip brushing at the edge of my vision, no matter where I turned. I pulled. The hatch dropped open with a soft groan, unfolding a narrow, rickety ladder that clattered down into place. Dust trickled from above, and a draft of air followed. Cool, stale, and metallic like the smell of coins soaked in water. Every instinct told me not to climb. But curiosity has a way of winning, doesn't it? The ladder groaned under my weight as I ascended. The light from the hallway below barely reached into the opening, so I fished out my phone and turned on the flashlight. A cone of pale light swept across the space, and my heart sank. The attic was there, a full room. The beams were old and splintered, coated in cobwebs. Boxes sat stacked in neat rows, some of them ancient, their cardboard buckling with moisture and time. Dust lay thick over everything. But that wasn't the worst part. The room didn't line up with the structure of the house. It was too big, much too big. The bungalow was a modest 2-bedroom with a small living area and kitchen, yet the attic stretched wide and deep, easily doubling the square footage of my entire home. My light swept farther, illuminating endless boxes and forgotten furniture draped in yellowed sheets. And then, at the far end, the beam caught something that made my skin crawl. A chair. It was facing away from me, turned toward the far wall. The kind of simple wooden chair you might see in a schoolroom, scuffed and worn. But what froze me in place wasn't the chair itself. It was the shape sitting in it. Slumped, still, almost blending into the shadows, was a figure. I nearly dropped my phone. My breath caught, and I scrambled backward down the ladder so quickly I nearly twisted my ankle when I hit the hallway floor. The hatch gaped open above me, the ladder still dangling. I slammed it shut, the sound reverberating through the walls. For the rest of the day, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that the shadows had played tricks on me, that there hadn't really been someone sitting in that chair. But night fell, and every time I passed the hallway, my eyes flicked up, expecting the hatch to open on its own. I barely slept. The next morning, I decided to prove to myself there was nothing there. Armed with a stronger flashlight, a dust mask, and a hammer clutched in my hand, I pulled the cord again and climbed. The boxes were still there. The air still smelled like metal and mold. But the chair, it was empty now. I forced myself to search. The boxes contained strange things: old toys, clothing styles from decades past, books with handwriting in the margins. None of it belonged to me, and none of it belonged to the previous owners either, according to what I knew. I checked public records online that afternoon. The house had only been built 30 years ago, owned by a single family before me. There had been no mention of additional construction, no attic, no hidden storage. That night, the scratching started. At first, it was faint, like mice skittering across wood, but it grew louder, the sound of something dragging along the floorboards above my ceiling. Occasionally, I swore I heard the chair creak. I stopped going into the hallway after dark. A week passed, and my nerves frayed thin. I was living in a house with a room that shouldn't exist, where things moved when I wasn't looking. On the seventh night, the noises grew louder, scratching, dragging, then finally a sound that chilled me to the bone. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps crossing the ceiling above my bed. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to seal the hatch. I called a contractor, a man I'd found through a friend, and told him I wanted the attic door gone. He laughed at first, but when he came to inspect it, I watched his face drain of color the moment he stepped into the hallway. He asked me, voice low, if I'd recently added that hatch. I shook my head. He didn't say another word, just muttered something about needing more tools and left in a hurry. He never came back. That night, the footsteps returned. Only now, they didn't stop above my bed. They descended. The ladder creaked. I lay frozen, staring at the closed bedroom door, listening as something climbed down into my hallway. The air grew colder, thicker, until I could barely breathe. And then, a knock. 3 slow knocks against my bedroom door. I never opened it. I sat there in silence, every muscle locked until dawn light seeped through the window. When I finally gathered the courage to check, the hallway was empty. The attic hatch was gone. Not sealed, not boarded over. Gone. The ceiling was smooth again, painted over, as if it had never existed. But I still don't sleep in that house, because even now, years later, whenever I close my eyes, I hear it. The sound of a chair creaking slowly in the dark and footsteps pacing just above me in a room that should never have been there. Story 4. The endless white room in the hospital wing. I used to work the night shift at a regional hospital, not far from the outskirts of the city. The place had a reputation. One of those institutions where the building was older than half the staff, and the wings seemed to have been stitched together like patchwork over decades. New wings sprouted up while the older sections were left to crumble quietly. That meant you could walk down a hallway that looked modern and fluorescent lit and sterile, only to turn a corner and find yourself in a corridor where the paint peeled and the tiles were yellowed with age. I didn't mind working there. Nights were quiet, the pay was steady, and if you kept your head down, you could avoid the politics of the day staff. But there was one wing, the West Wing, that everyone had stories about. It had been shut down years before, supposedly due to lack of funding for renovations. Most doors were locked, plastered over with faded "Do Not Enter" signs. But even from the outside, it always felt wrong. One night, just after 2 a.m., I was asked to deliver some paperwork to the records office on the 3rd floor. The quickest route took me past the entrance to the West Wing. Normally, I ignored it. But that night, as I walked past, I noticed something strange. A door standing slightly ajar. Not unusual by itself, but the problem was that I had passed that hallway dozens of times before, and I swore there hadn't been a door at that spot before. It wasn't the old heavy fire doors that usually sealed the wing. It was just a plain, unmarked door. White, clean, as if it had been painted yesterday. I hesitated, the paperwork sweating in my hands, and felt that creeping pull of curiosity I should have ignored. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the usual muffled hospital quiet filled with the hum of vents and distant beeps of monitors, but an absolute silence that pressed in on my ears. The second thing was the color. The room was entirely white, the walls, the floor, the ceiling. No doors, no windows, no equipment, just a perfectly sterile white cube. I should have turned around immediately, but the door had closed behind me. There was no handle on the inside. My pulse jumped, and I tried not to panic as I pressed my palms against the wall where the door had been. Nothing. Just smooth, seamless white. That's when the hum began. It was faint at first, a low vibration running through the floor beneath my shoes. Then it grew louder, like the distant thrum of machinery, though there was no source I could identify. I tried to back away, but every step I took forward felt like the room stretched further away. It was subtle at first, but soon I realized I had been walking for minutes in what should have been a space no larger than a storage closet. The walls never got closer. I turned around in a panic, but the spot where I had entered had vanished completely. There was nothing but endless white in every direction. I don't know how long I wandered. My phone's clock stopped updating, frozen at 2:14 a.m. The battery icon didn't drain. I tried to use the flashlight to find some imperfection in the walls, some crack or shadow, but the light didn't behave normally. It didn't cast beams or shadows. It simply blended into the endless brightness around me. And then I began to hear it. Voices. Not clear ones, more like the muffled sounds of people talking just beyond the wall. I shouted until my throat burned, but they never seemed to hear me. Instead, the voices grew sharper, angrier, overlapping into something like screaming. At one point, I swore I heard my own name. The hum beneath my feet intensified, and I felt the ground tilt slightly, like the entire space was shifting. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. The white around me began to ripple, as if the walls weren't walls at all, but stretched fabric. Shapes pressed against them, vaguely human, though distorted, like figures trapped on the other side. Fingers splayed outward, heads bowed, mouths opening in silent cries. I scrambled backward, though there was nowhere to go. The shapes seemed to follow, always pressing just out of reach, their features warping against the surface of that strange glowing skin. One of them leaned close enough that I could make out its face. It was mine. That broke something in me. I screamed, pounding at the floor until my fists ached. The sound of my own voice echoed unnaturally, stretched into something unrecognizable, as if the room itself was mocking me. And then, without warning, I was back in the hallway. The door clicked shut behind me. I staggered backward, gasping for air, clutching the paperwork I had dropped somewhere inside. But when I turned, the door wasn't there, just smooth plaster wall, as if it had never existed. I ran to the records office, pale and shaking. The clerk gave me a strange look, asked if I was okay, but I couldn't explain. My paperwork was gone. My phone had reset itself, the clock blinking 12 a.m. as if it had been restarted. The next night, I went back with 2 other orderlies. I told them I had seen something strange, and we searched that hallway together. But of course, there was nothing, just the locked, dust-choked doors of the West Wing. Still, sometimes when I pass that corridor, I swear I see it again. A plain white door, waiting for me. And I know, if I ever step inside again, I might not come back. Story 5. The locked door at Grandma's house that shouldn't have been there. When I was 12, my parents decided it would be best if I spent the summer with my grandmother. She lived in an old farmhouse on the edge of a small rural town, a place where time seemed to move slower and where the night air always smelled faintly of soil and rain. The house itself was a patchwork of renovations, parts of it dating back nearly a century, while other sections had been repaired or expanded in odd, almost careless ways. I had been to Grandma's house plenty of times before, but I always got the sense there was something different about it. Rooms felt longer than they should have been. Hallways didn't always match up with the outside dimensions of the house. But I told myself it was just an old, creaky building that my imagination was making stranger than it really was. That summer, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about her home. It was one evening, maybe 2 weeks into my stay. I'd been reading in the upstairs bedroom, my usual spot, when I heard a faint noise, like a door creaking open. At first, I thought it was Grandma moving around, but she was downstairs in the kitchen. I could hear the distant clink of pans. Curious, I set my book aside and wandered down the hallway. That's when I noticed it. Halfway down the corridor, between the bathroom and what used to be my uncle's old room, was a door I had never seen before. It was narrow and tall, painted a dull beige that blended almost perfectly with the wall. But it wasn't the paint that unsettled me. It was the fact that I knew it hadn't been there earlier in the day. I had walked down that hallway countless times before. There was no door, and yet there it was, closed, with a tarnished brass knob that looked older than the rest of the house. I froze, staring at it for what felt like several minutes. My heart pounded in my chest as 1,000 possibilities rushed through my head. Maybe it was a closet I'd somehow overlooked all these years. Maybe Grandma had it hidden behind furniture until recently. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This door had appeared. I reached for the knob. It was locked. The metal was cold beneath my hand, far colder than it should have been, considering the summer heat. I rattled it once, twice, trying to see if it would budge. It didn't. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening for sounds. The house was old and always creaked, but I swear I heard the soft rattle of that knob turning in the darkness. I pulled the blanket over my head, telling myself it was only my imagination. The next morning, the door was still there. I asked Grandma about it over breakfast. "Grandma," I said cautiously, "what's behind the door in the upstairs hall, the one between the bathroom and Uncle Ray's old room?" Her spoon froze halfway to her mouth. For a split second, her expression flickered into something I had never seen before: fear. She quickly forced a smile and said, "Oh, that old thing? Just storage. Don't worry about it." But her voice was tense. Her hand shook slightly as she set the spoon back down. That was the moment I knew she was hiding something. Over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to the door again and again. Each time I'd test the knob, but it was always locked. Sometimes, if I pressed my ear against the wood, I swore I could hear faint sounds on the other side, like footsteps pacing slowly or whispering too soft to make out. One afternoon, when Grandma went into town, I decided I had to try harder. I searched the house for a key. She kept most of her things in the sewing room, and after rummaging through tins of buttons, old photographs, and broken watches, I finally found a ring of antique keys tucked inside a drawer. My hands trembled as I carried them back upstairs. The first key didn't fit, neither did the second or third, but the fourth slid into the lock with an almost reluctant click. I hesitated, my breath caught in my throat. Then I turned it. The door creaked open. Beyond it was a narrow staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. My first thought was, this doesn't make sense. There couldn't possibly be another staircase in this part of the house. It should have led straight outside. And yet, there it was, stretching down farther than I could see. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. The air was colder, heavier, as if the space had been sealed off for decades. The wooden steps groaned beneath me as I descended. By the time I reached the bottom, I was disoriented. It felt like I had gone down much farther than the house's foundation should have allowed. At the bottom was a hallway. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling and water-stained. Old portraits hung crookedly, their faces blurred by age and grime. I moved slowly, shining the flashlight from side to side. Then I saw it. A row of doors, at least 5 of them, lined the hallway. Each one looked exactly like the one upstairs. I tried the first. Locked. The second. Locked. By the time I reached the third, I could feel my pulse racing in my ears. This one opened. Inside was a small bedroom. The bed was neatly made, as if someone had just left it. There was even a faint indentation in the pillow, as though a head had recently rested there. On the nightstand sat a glass of water, beads of condensation still clinging to the surface. I backed away, nearly tripping over myself. The fourth door creaked open to reveal a kitchen, complete with a table, chairs, and an old stove. The faint smell of food lingered, though the room looked untouched by time. None of this should have been here. As I turned to leave, I heard a noise. Something dragging along the floor, coming from farther down the hallway. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out completely. In the suffocating dark, I heard the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow, heavy, just behind me. I ran. I don't remember climbing the stairs, only that when I burst back into the hallway of Grandma's house, the door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the walls. The keys slipped from my trembling hand. When I looked back, the door was gone. The wall was smooth, as though it had never been there. I never found it again, no matter how many times I searched. But sometimes, late at night, when I stayed at Grandma's house in the years after, I'd hear it, the faint creak of a door opening, the slow drag of footsteps moving in a place that shouldn't exist. They say curiosity is what makes us human, but sometimes curiosity reveals things we were never meant to find. Rooms that shouldn't exist, spaces that defy reason, and doors that open into nightmares we can't explain. Maybe the walls around us hold more than just wood, brick, or plaster. Maybe they hide something waiting for the right person to stumble upon it. If you ever come across a door that doesn't belong, think twice before turning the knob. Some places aren't just hidden, they're meant to stay closed forever.